Lacie Nelson is innocent. I'm convinced she's innocent. Every attorney that played a role in her case is convinced she's innocent. The evidence that was not able to be presented to the jury shows she's innocent. And this is a young woman with no bad aspect to her, who got wrapped up in a situation that wasn't even her own. She's been separated from her children. She's sitting in a cell at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, and she shouldn't be there.
A judge emailed me out of the blue and said, I have a case that I want to talk to you about, can we meet? And I met with this judge, and they said, will you keep this anonymous? I don't want to be outed. But there is a case, and I think this person is innocent. Her name is Lacie Nelson. I've been part of this case as a judge, but we're not going to be able to provide her relief because of lawyering problems and procedural problems.
Lacie Nelson testified at her first trial, which resulted in a hung jury. At least 4 jurors believed she was not guilty. At Lacie Nelson's second trial, she was advised not to testify, and she was convicted.
I mean, I think this is one of those rare cases where the system has failed.
I've always felt horrified that Lacie was convicted on this. I have no doubt that Lacie is innocent of these charges, as innocent as Shannon was and is. The appeal process saved Shannon. She was able to get back into trial and to have a jury see this case for what it was. That's been denied Lacie. None of her appeals were successful. And I think the system really has failed her.
She's caring, she's empathetic, she's outgoing, she's giving. Lacie's honest, she's sincere. I'm not going to give up defending the truth that my sister was wrongly accused.
In 2003, Lacie Nelson and her husband Roy temporarily stayed with his sister Shannon and her family.
And Lacie and I went to live with Shannon due to the fact that we had no other place to go when I was out of work.
I used to be married to Lee Marvin Concert. We had 4 children, 3 boys and a little girl.
My sister got married and pregnant right after high school, so she had no downtime, no college time, no fun time as a young adult.
My father, when he found out that I was pregnant, told my ex-husband that it was nice that he was 11 years older than I was. That way he could raise his wife the way he wanted her, because he was 30 and I was 19 when I got pregnant. My ex-husband was extremely controlling. He owned and approved every action, every outing, every single thing I did. And come July, we actually split. I thought we were on a break. He didn't think we were on a break. And so technically, I guess you could say I got caught on a break. And that incensed his anger incredibly.
In August 2003, Shannon moved out of her family home and separated from her husband.
It was just a couple of days before I was scheduled to have a visit with the kids that the allegations came out.
The children around that time made accusations that Shannon had sexually abused them.
I rode in the elevator with him one day during the restraining order hearings, where he said to me that he was going to destroy my life.
Lee wanted to move to Washington, and Shannon didn't want to move because all of her family is here. And so Shannon, from what I understand, Shannon said, "Over my dead body."
The original false allegations by Shannon's children that their mother had sexually abused them occurred in 2004. Many months later, in 2005, Shannon's 2 youngest sons first made accusations against Roy and then Lacie as well.
And at some point, Lacie and her husband, the brother of this woman, were asked to be character witnesses in her trial. Lacie and her husband, Roy Chuck, decide, yes, we'll go testify and say there's no way this could have happened. The accusations were then brought against my sister and her husband to discredit them so that they would not be able to be credible witnesses on the stand to support Shannon.
After being accused of sexually assaulting her own children, Shannon went to trial instead of accepting a plea bargain offer.
One of the themes that we frequently find in these cases is that the children are coached, meaning that somebody is telling the kids what to say. And frequently we see this in the context of divorces, and one parent is coaching a child what to say to make the other parent look bad. The children came across as not very credible, and the jury ultimately returned verdicts of not guilty on all counts except for one child, one act, the oldest child.
After her conviction, Shannon went to prison but continued to maintain her innocence. She received a sentence of 20 years to life in prison. The prosecution made a plea bargain offer to Roy that was nearly impossible to refuse. Plead guilty, and he would be immediately released from jail, avoid prison time, and receive 10 years of probation. Roy took the deal.
I was afraid if we went to trial that they would find us both guilty and sentence us to 25 to life in DOC. If you're a convicted sex offender in prison and they find out by your papers when you go through the gates, they make life a living hell for you. I mean, even kill you. And I got scared. I got really scared. So when they came at me with the 10 flat sentence, I took it. I figured that worst case scenario is if Lacie was found guilty, that she would go to prison and at least our two boys would have at least one of their parents.
And I knew that he didn't do it. So after, he and I went to lunch. And I said, Roy, why? He's like, hey, my lawyer told me that as a man, there's no way I can beat this charge. And then he described to me what they would do to me in prison. And I said, I won't survive that.
Roy has now completed his 10 years of probation. The prosecution made a similar plea bargain offer to Lacie Nelson. Plead guilty, and she would not serve any prison time, but instead would receive probation. Lacie maintained her innocence and went to trial.
I went to the trials because I believe in Lacie, and I believe in her innocence. To me, the kids seemed less than credible. They seemed coached, because what they wrote in their letters and what they said were different, and then even what they said at times was changed. And so it just seemed to me they were way less than credible. And somebody's future was being determined based on unreliable testimony.
The boys' allegations were implausible on their face. For example, the middle son testified that one instance of sexual abuse supposedly committed by his mother Shannon, his uncle Roy, and his aunt Lacie had lasted for 6.5 hours. Shannon's middle son also claimed that he had sucked breast milk out of Lacie's breasts. But Lacie had only been able to nurse each of her sons for less than a month. At the time this sexual episode was alleged to have occurred, Lacie's son was at least 4 years old. Lacie Nelson testified at her first trial, which resulted in a hung jury. At least 4 jurors believed she was not guilty. At Lacie Nelson's second trial, she was advised not to testify, and she was convicted. The jury that convicted Lacie never heard Shannon's account of how, during her divorce and custody battle, her soon-to-be ex-husband had threatened to destroy her life.
So Shannon always maintained her innocence. What's important is when you go to prison as a sex offender, you have to do treatment. And if you're ever going to be released, you have to work your way through sex offender treatment. And one of the first things you're required to do is to admit your offense. If you are in denial, they will not allow you to progress in treatment, and you will never get out of prison. She never admitted to doing anything in prison. She always denied the accusations when she was in prison. Then there was an appeal. The case was reversed. So Shannon was able to get out of prison. She was on bond, and we retried the case. And at every single step of the way, Shannon always insisted that she was not guilty. She would not take any kind of plea bargain. She never, ever, ever even considered pleading guilty to anything in these cases.
At her second trial in 2010, Shannon was found not guilty by the jury. She had finally been acquitted of all the false charges against her. Attorney Randy Canny has worked on behalf of Lacie Nelson in her post-conviction appeals.
The real brunt, the crux of our motion was the issue of newly discovered evidence, and that's that her sister-in-law, Shannon, had been unavailable throughout the course of her 2 trials because Shannon herself was facing charges. And she was able to bring to fore just critical facts about what was going on in the house at the time, how it was always a busy house, there was always people going and coming, how Lacie, she never saw any indication of Lacie ever sexually abusing these children. She herself had never sexually abused these children. And she also was able to bring the issue of the motive of her now ex-husband, who, when Shannon had left him, had threatened her and said, you know, I'm going to ruin you. And he did.
I've always felt horrified that Lacie was convicted on this. I have no doubt that Lacie is innocent of these charges, as innocent as Shannon was and is. The appeal process saved Shannon. She was able to get back into trial and to have a jury see this case for what it was. That's been denied Lacie. None of her appeals were successful. And I think the system really has failed her.
Justin Marceau is a law professor with a unique perspective on Lacie Nelson's case.
So I found out about Lacie Nelson's case in what I would say is one of the most unique circumstances of my life. A judge emailed me out of the blue and said, I have a case that I want to talk to you about, can we meet? And I met with this judge, and they said, will you keep this anonymous? I don't want to be outed. But there is a case, and I think this person is innocent. Her name is Lacie Nelson. I've been part of this case as a judge, but we're not going to be able to provide her relief because of lawyering problems and procedural problems. So, I mean, Lacie Nelson is the kind of case where you see the courts saying their hands are tied. It's the kind of instance where judges will say, there's nothing we can do here, but thank goodness we have executive clemency. And clemency is that power that allows the executive branch to give somebody leniency when the courts are able to, because there's some sort of procedural irregularity or something unfair. And so this is kind of the ideal type scenario, because everyone around, including judges, have said, this is a very strong case of innocence, but the courts don't feel like they can do anything.
Lacie has been denied parole because she can't take the prison's sex offender treatment program, which requires participants to agree and admit that they committed the crimes they are serving time for.
From my understanding, what's keeping Lacie inside is her refusal to take a class that she would have to admit guilt to the crime she's falsely accused of. She's not going to admit guilt for a crime she never committed. She's not going to admit guilt for a crime she never committed.
I was in the military for over 27 years. I've met a tremendous amount of people, and I really try to look at the person inside of whatever skin they are. When I look at Lacie's character, she is an individual who shines through. For someone to be not guilty and not sign those documents and still be forced to remain in prison, that is a huge sign of her internal character of being incredibly strong of faith and not one to to lie to get ahead.
Lacie has made the most of her incarceration by working hard, helping others, and completing many rehabilitation programs.
Lacie and I still talk. She calls me a couple times a month just to check in, see how the boys are doing. She's really bettered herself in this situation. She's kept herself busy.
She has pursued an education. She's taken all sorts of classes to better herself. She went to school and basically has earned a seminary degree while she's been incarcerated. She's actually getting her general credits right now, her basics, her math, her psychology, English. She's getting all of that wrapped up so that she'll have the equivalent of 2 degrees.
Lacie Nelson has been a straight A student behind bars. In 2022, she earned an associate's degree.
She's also started a ministry where she takes the money, the little bit of money she makes, and she gives glasses to inmates. I mean, she is out of her own money. She doesn't charge them a dime. And she's not letting this knock her down. She's living out the life of an innocent woman.
After more than a decade of incarceration in prison, Lacie Nelson developed serious medical problems.
In 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, she began coughing up blood, which was a huge concern. She had already had pneumonia the previous year, had battled that. She was eventually diagnosed with a lung infection toward the latter part of 2020, had 2 lobes of her right lung removed in March of 2021. And then she gets diagnosed with thyroid cancer in January of 2022.
Lacie Nelson is serving an indeterminate sentence of up to life in prison at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility. If granted clemency, Lacie would have the support of her family and community to reestablish herself.
No matter where she is, we will help her in any extent that we can. We open up our house to her. We don't want to give Lacie just a fish to feed her for a day. We want to teach her how to fish so she can feed herself for a lifetime.
My husband and I are preparing a place for Lacie so that there is a career for Lacie, that there is an opportunity for Lacie so that she can not only come live with us, but that there's a property available for her if she wants to live in the garage apartment on our property. She can come be a part of our life, our community, our friends, our family.
Governor Polis, my plea to you is to right the wrong that happened in this case. Shannon was innocent, and eventually the system worked for her. But it didn't work for Lacie. Lacie is innocent as well, and I hope that you right the wrong that has been done to her.
I would just love for you to seriously consider giving Lacie Nelson a commutation of her sentence. I believe she's innocent. I believe justice has been miscarried, and I believe that she is not a threat, and I believe she will be a great addition to our community.
Governor Polis, this is Ken Mays. I truly thank you for this opportunity to ask you and plead for my sister-in-law, Lacie Nelson's clemency, release from prison.
Governor Polis, I've been doing this a very long time. Lacie Nelson is innocent. I'm convinced she's innocent. Every attorney that played a role in her case is convinced she's innocent. The evidence that was not able to be presented to the jury shows she's innocent. And this is a young woman with no bad aspect to her who got wrapped up in a situation that wasn't even her own. She's been separated from her children. She's sitting in a cell at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, and she shouldn't be there.
I mean, I think this is one of those rare cases where the system has failed. She's not going to get out through the courts, and I just hope that Governor Yee will take this as an opportunity to use the clemency power for good.
She has never hurt anybody. She is innocent of all these charges. She's never sexually assaulted anybody, never even hurt anybody. And I beg you, please set her free so she can be with her children.
Governor Polis, I am asking you today to let Lacie Nelson out of prison. She has suffered greatly for crimes that she did not commit. I am asking that you give her the opportunity to live the life that she deserves to live.
She was wrongly accused. And it's time to right the wrong. This is not a person that's going to bring harm to anyone. She'll make you proud.
For more information, go to www.justiceforlacie.com.